topic of today's panel is not another crypto blockchain panel. So maybe it's useful in case that not everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say those words. I'll just quickly define them. So for those of you who don't know, blockchain cryptocurrencies is kind of a new technology that's being used. It's a distributed digital ledger, largely being used in finance, but also in some other areas that we're going to talk about. And that's basically as much as I'm going to define what it is. If you want to know more about what it is, this is not the panel for you. What we're going to talk about for this panel is why it matters and why you should care about it. And trust me, if you decide you want to learn more about how it works, I've spent the last 6 years falling down this endless rabbit hole, and I'm still probably nowhere close to the bottom. And you can go on that journey too if you want. But again, the emphasis of today's panel is really, again, not to get down into the details of like technically what it is and how it works, but to talk about why you should maybe care, because I and a lot of others, including the two folks with me on this panel, believe quite deeply that this is going to be a transformational technology that's going to change the world. It's going to touch every industry. That's going to touch every vertical. Whether it's, business, whether it's, kind of social, like giving or charity, I think the world is going to fundamentally change because of this. And so we're excited to kind of share a little bit about why we're excited about it today. So two things I want to say real quickly before we start doing some quick introductions and jump off with the discussion. The first is, this is an obligatory disclosure because we're talking about, in some cases, cryptocurrencies are assets that you can buy on exchanges. And I want to just make very clear at this point that nothing that I or any of the panelists say should be construed as investment advice. Legally required to say that. Danny's like, good job, you remembered. But yeah, so anyway, so that's just the one thing. And the other is that we're going to try and make this discussion a little bit more interactive. So we're going to actually have two parts for Q&A. So we're going to kind of start out, we're going to do a little bit of discussion up here, and then kind of halfway through the session, we're going to open it up to the room and and let people kind of participate. And then we'll take a couple questions or, let a couple of people talk then, and then we'll resume our kind of panel discussion, and then we'll open it up at the end. And hopefully we'll have a lot of fun, and hopefully you all will walk away having learned something. So again, thank you guys very much for being here. At this point, I guess it's maybe a good time for all of us to introduce ourselves. So, and maybe we'll do that. I can start. So like I said, I'm Alex. I'm a Tillman Scholar from 2018. I joined the Army, I applied to go to West Point in 2003. I was a very average high school student though, and was not accepted in 2003. So I had to wait another year. I'd spend a year in purgatory at New Mexico Military Institute. Actually, random questions. Anyone here attended New Mexico Military Institute? Yeah, that's, one person. Oh, okay. All right. That's closer than I usually get. Usually everyone's like, yeah, exactly. Anyway, I graduated from West Point in 2008, commissioned as an infantry officer. I did a tour in Afghanistan and decided to try out for special forces. And, I went through that whole pipeline and became a Green Beret end of 2013. And then I did two tours, one in Iraq in 2014, or to Iraq in 2014, and then one to Turkey in 2015. And it was actually in that last trip where I was exposed to blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So I was a Green Beret, special forces officer, and we were working with the Syrian rebels that were fighting ISIS. And we had kind of a practical problem that we faced, which was, the Syrians were on the Syrian side of the border and we were on the Turkish side of the border, and they needed money for supplies. And we were kind of like scratching our heads on, is there a better way than just handing them bags of cash at a border crossing, which is obviously not really ideal from, for many reasons. And a Turkish intelligence officer was like, hey, you should think about paying them in Bitcoin. And, we were all just a bunch of, 5th Special Forces Group ground pounders. We're like, what is Bitcoin? And he's like, oh, you can transfer. It's a way for you to pay them like digitally on the internet. It's like internet money. I'm like, okay. And that was my first exposure to it. And leaving from that deployment, as I was reflecting back on that experience and then many others that I had throughout the Middle East, I kept coming back to that idea because it stuck with me as a technology that I thought was really interesting. And it was interesting to me because in the process of that whole experience, I realized that the financial system for Americans in particularly is kind of special. Like we as Americans have a special experience going overseas. You can pretty much go to any ATM around the world and pull out dollars. That's pretty true universally. But if you're a Syrian refugee fleeing from a conflict that, maybe you're just a bystander, and you may not even be on a side, but just as a result of the conflict, you get kind of drawn into it, and you just decide one day you need to leave quickly with your family, and you end up in Turkey in a refugee camp. There's no way to get easy access to your Syrian pounds or your property, or basically assets that you've stored wealth in over the course of your life. And so many of these people who I worked with during that deployment went from being professionals who in Syrian society had played by the rules their whole lives. And then when the conflict broke out, they were in refugee camps and ended up going from that to living hand to mouth overnight. And so the idea of, as I was reflecting on that, the idea of a digital asset or a distributed ledger that effectively functioned as a bank account that you could keep in your head was a really exciting idea to me. And so that is how I fell down the rabbit hole. I knew I wanted to get into the space. I had no idea what to do. So as many, and in fact, and perhaps some of you in this audience, I didn't know exactly what path I wanted to take post-military. So I applied to an MBA, the ultimate, like, I don't know what I'm going to do yet kind of choice. And I was very fortunate to attend Stanford University, which fortunately had a pretty active kind of community of people who were interested in cryptocurrency and blockchain. And yeah, I ended up, so I was doing MBA stuff, and I ended up moonlighting in a computer science class for cryptography, which I absolutely had no business being in. But thanks to great inflation, I only got a C- instead of an F-. But the professor was an advisor at a venture fund that specialized in crypto, and he introduced me, and I ended up meeting one of the women there who was a general partner, and she ended up offering me a job. So this was Andreessen Horowitz, and so I got a job at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venture fund that focused on a lot of things, but they had a particular team focusing on crypto in 2019 after graduating Stanford. I did that for 2 years, so I kind of got to see really the growth of the space over that time, which was an amazing experience. Got to meet a ton of great people. But at the end of that, I felt like I missed, or I wanted to be closer, quote unquote, closer to the action. I wanted to be at a startup. I wanted to be an operator. I wanted to help effect the change that I was really excited about this technology representing. So I left A16Z at the end of 2020, and I joined a startup called Alio. I joined as the chief strategy officer, which, by the way, is a title that you get if like they don't really know what you're going to do. They're like, you can be a strategy officer. But anyway, I did that. I helped them raise their Series A, and then later their Series B, and I became chief operating officer, and that's what I do now. So the team, 30-person team, fully distributed crypto startup, and yeah, so that's me. Joe, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Joe Unruh. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and my journey into crypto was a little bit different, but here we are sitting on the same stage. So I went to the Naval Academy right after high school. I'm from California, became a Navy EOD officer, largely because of Brad Snyder. Some of you may know him, another Tillman scholar. He was actually my mentor when I was a plebe at the Naval Academy. So I went into the EOD community, left active duty in 2016, was working full-time as a defense contractor, and also didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I went and got my MBA, and those were the boxes. Yeah, it was like, which box do I check next? And so yeah, meanwhile, as a defense contractor, I was working in an underwater robotics laboratory at the Space and Naval Warfare Center in San Diego, and there was kind of when the crypto craze started happening. There was the documentary on Netflix, and all of the people that were driving the boats for these underwater vehicles that we were launching and recovering off of the coast of San Diego were launching these vehicles for 8-hour missions and then trading crypto on their phones. And so I actually did not get bit by the bug at that point, even though they were like, "Oh, we're making a ton of money doing crypto." And I was like, I don't know. I was pretty skeptical. And then flash forward a few years, I started pursuing a career in writing. And so I've been existing in this ecosystem, this literary ecosystem where writers and artists, are trying to come up in the writing world and getting published. And if anybody in this room has tried to get published, you submit your work widely, you get very used to rejection. And then when you do get published, you maybe your like cousin in like the Midwest somewhere reads your story, and then it kind of goes into this like black hole of Web 2, and you generally don't get paid very much for your writing. And so I was doing this and then working in various other industries to support my family because it's hard to make a living as a writer. And I started like becoming introduced to all these companies that were pivoting towards the crypto space, and specifically with more of like an art and media and content angle to it. So I saw like crypto kitties and I was like, what's a crypto kitty? I want to know more. And so I got bit by the NFT bug. And so I started just like doing a massive deep dive on like what is a non-fungible token and like how does this actually work. And this looks like a crazy JPEG picture that people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for. I don't get it. And we'll probably get into this a little bit more. I started thinking about like the applications of that for art and publishing. And so recently I've started my own endeavor that's in this space that publishes literary works as NFTs. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but that's my journey into crypto.
Oh, real quick, how many people here are getting their MBA? Just out of curiosity. Okay. I'm sure you have a clearer vision of where you're going than maybe me or Joe, but.
Yeah, I'm seeing a common theme here with the MBA thing, and my story might be similar to that. So, yeah, Mark Daly's my name. I'm from Ireland. I a bit of a non-linear background. I was an air traffic controller for 2 years. Wasn't very good at it, to be quite honest, and didn't know what to do with my life, so went back and got my MBA. And when that finished, I took a holiday to Chicago for a couple of days and got a job here by accident, I think, as a futures broker, and did that at a pretty dead time in the market. It was low volatility. Nobody was really making money, but we were just all sort of existing. And came home from work one day, and my roommate had like 2 screens in front of him with like charts on it. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm trading this thing called Ethereum. I'm like, what's that? And he's like, it's like Bitcoin, but it's cheaper. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So a week later, I see him again. I'm like, how's your Ethereum doing? And he goes, no, it's called Ethereum. And it just went from like, $10 to $30 in a week. I was like, I don't care what it's called. I want to buy some. So I sat down and opened an account right there with him. And we just started trading. And I kind of fell into the rabbit hole of just getting involved in crypto, learning more about it, and just sort of having fun at that point. And then eventually the sort of super cycle started. More and more people got involved. And I was like, okay, I want to get involved in this here and actually work in this environment, work with these people. And I left my job as a futures broker, joined a cryptocurrency exchange that was like a very early startup. And that was like 4 years ago. And so today we provide like backend infrastructure to enable any company to offer a crypto product. So I've been doing that for the past 4 years, working with companies that are looking at the world of Web3, thinking about how they can exist and bridge their current business into that. So yeah, excited to share more of those details today. And I'm really excited to learn more about the Pat Tillman Foundation. I've had a great introduction this morning from these guys, and yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing to be part of. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's give Mark a hand. We called him in here on Saturday morning to come share with you guys. So thank you, Mark, for being here.
I wasn't doing much else. You're good.
Cool. So let's just dive right into. I think the most interesting question is, what is going to be, in your minds, the most impactful use case for this technology? Like in 10 or 20 years, like what's going to be the thing that, seems obvious, like to, the internet browser, kind of does to us at the time. It's just part of the fabric of all of our lives. What in crypto or blockchain do you guys think that'll be?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think my answer is I really don't know. I think that's what I would say to that. But what we're starting to see is companies taking a stab at it. People are thinking, okay, your day to day, like how we live our lives today in the world of finance. It's it's 9 a.m. to 4. It's Monday to Friday. Bank closed on Friday at 4 o'clock. the wires are down, nothing happens after that. Crypto is 24/7, 365. So what we're seeing right now is companies looking at how they can use things like stable coins, which are pegged to a dollar value 1-to-1, and how they can use that there for settlements outside of, say, banking hours. So, the use case here is, let's imagine you're a merchant, you've got a lot of transactions happening at the weekend. You're not getting that cash in your bank account until Monday, because that's when, the bank will settle to you. And ultimately, stable coins can be used then to actually transfer value outside of these banking windows, and ultimately do it faster, cheaper, and provide that sort of first use case for these companies to get involved and start to think about this differently. So that's what we're seeing as like the first step, I think, where people from a risk tolerance perspective as well can sort of see this here as like an easy way in. And then after that, it's no different to me sitting down and buying Ethereum. They fall into the rabbit hole. They're like, okay, this is fun, but what else can we do? So that opens the world to DeFi and a whole host of things you can do outside of that there. But that's kind of what I see as that first step to make that happen.
Yeah, stable coins are kind of like the way, that I define this as smart dollars, if at least if it's pegged to a dollar. And I think it has huge potential. I think everything that Mark just said is right. But I guess, Mark, maybe elaborate a little bit more on how global, like settlement, certainly across borders, like how that works today, and compare like this to that.
Yeah, I guess if you're transacting in value between the US and Japan, they have like T+2 settlement cycles. So it takes 2 days to move cash from Chicago to Japan today. Stablecoins, this is all instant. And so to think about the applications that can have for like end users, just people like us, like that provides such, I would say it's kind of like efficiency that relates back to your user experience that you get in terms of like what price you pay for things like FX, or just even day-to-day experience that you have with different applications. I think that's ultimately what this problem solves, is that we can have this super interconnectedness and 24/7, 365. There's no sort of limit to what they can kind of like do in terms of efficiency of that.
Yeah, and the friction of transacting in that world is much, much lower. And I think something that, again, may be relevant to people who are maybe outside of the finance world is there's a concept in blockchain and cryptocurrency called a DAO, which is an acronym for a decentralized autonomous organization. And it sounds way fancier than it really is, but it's basically just, it's effectively like an LLC or, some kind of like corporate structure or nonprofit structure that's encoded, the logic of which is encoded instead of in a legal document or in addition to a legal document on this, kind of global distributed ledger. And the interesting thing about this is because, money is kind of inherent in this paradigm. These things can hold themselves own value. And so to a very concrete example of what Mark is talking about is there was a DAO that launched when the war between Russia and Ukraine happened or started, I guess like the most recent incarnation this year. And it was a DAO say like, hey, if anyone wants to support, the International Legion for the Defense of Ukraine, or the military of Ukraine, or just Ukraine in general, you can, send a stable coin to this address. And, if you would have looked at doing that in a world before blockchain, this is like this, the Ukraine, Defense Department would have to set up like a US based entity for you to wire money to and go through PayPal and maybe pay like a 3% fee. And like, it would have taken weeks probably to set up the infrastructure. And it would have been, and to Mark's point, T+2 settlement, it's not, the money is not going to get there right away. But you can have like these organizations that are kind of mission focused that can instantly accumulate capital or take in capital from anywhere. And another really great example, sorry, Joe, I'm going to get to you right after this, but that's one other example that I thought is really cool is there was another DAO that was focused on buying a copy of the Constitution. I don't know if you guys remember this. You remember that? Yeah. So there was a DAO that formed to just buy a copy of the Constitution to show, the intent was to put it basically in a museum or something somewhere to display it publicly. And they had tens of thousands of people contribute from all over the country and even the world contribute to that because they raised millions of dollars. Ultimately, were outbid by the CEO of, was it Blackstone?
It was Ken Griffin. He's in Chicago. Citadel.
Okay.
Citadel CEO.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So as the CEO of Citadel outbid, but it was like, tens of $1 million bid. I can't remember, but I mean, that fundraising campaign for that exploded, overnight. And so it's effectively, it's a Kickstarter that is and or it enables kind of like Kickstarter type campaigns that are massively, massively higher potential, just given the fact that you can attract liquidity and capital from anywhere. Okay, so we'll put a pin on, or put a period on that sentence somewhere around those use cases. Now I want to pass it over to you, Joe, and get your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. Sort of similar to Mark. Like, I'm not sure exactly. Like, I don't know what is like the biggest impact that Web3 and blockchain is going to have. I think we don't know yet. There's this space is moving so quickly. I do think that there is something about the tokenization of fungible assets using blockchain, and another term for a smart contract, which is a contract that's written into the blockchain that says, the owner of this token can do X, Y, and Z, and not ABC. And then the logic is built so that must be executed. So I think about things like buying or selling a car in the state of California, and we have like paper titles. And that just seems like very strange to me that in today's world, we're doing things with like handwritten signatures and paper titles. So I think we're going to see like global and just commerce across the board start to utilize blockchain technology to actually like write smart contracts into the blockchain for everyday exchange of goods and things like that. I really believe people, well, hopefully we're not all buying gas still like 20 years from now, but I really think like things like, buying gas will actually be done on blockchain, because the ledger is really what it comes down to, and the ability to have things like, hard coded into a ledger that's accessible from anywhere in the world. And you can see what's happening with those goods and services and the data that provides, right? Like, we're not operating off of forecasting algorithms anymore. We're operating off of like real data about how people are exchanging goods within a global economy.
Yeah, I think that last part is really important. And to me, like, one of the biggest subtleties that a lot of people miss, a lot of like the steel man, in my opinion, criticism of a lot of blockchain applications is that, you have this big distributed ledger and computer. And like, by the way, that's not that efficient, right? You have thousands of computers running around the world that are basically re-executing everything. And the re-execution is necessary because of the trust. It's a zero trust architecture. And you could argue that you're like, well, look, for many of these use cases that you're talking about, like, there's a trusted party and it's okay. And you can do it much more efficiently if you just run it on a server. And the thing that I tell everyone is basically exactly what Joe said, is that it becomes really the data standardization of it becomes really important, because if you've ever worked in a large organization and God forbid, worked in a consortium with several large organizations and tried to come up with a standard way of doing things, it's extremely painful, right? A lot of parochial interests try and get inserted, and oftentimes it just goes nowhere. And for me, like, I saw this, when I was at A16Z, we were part of the Facebook Libra cryptocurrency, which ultimately went nowhere. But that was a consortium of different banks and different financial institutions. And everyone was basically trying to get a word in on like, hey, what is this kind of standard data layer looks like? Because that's fundamentally what this distributed ledger is. And the amazing thing about a blockchain like Ethereum or Bitcoin or several others is that, like, it just exists as a thing. And people look at it, and then, once it starts getting a little adoption, it just becomes a shelling point or a natural point of aggregation for, I guess, really standardizing data in a particular way that then everyone can plug into and use, that's open and permissionless. So I want to go back though, Joe, to, you mentioned a minute ago, the NFT side. And I guess, maybe to take a devil's advocate for a minute, you mentioned it's like, oh, it's just an expensive JPEG. Yeah. So walk me through how you got from what is this expensive JPEG to, wow, this is really potentially transformational.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess like my knowledge of it is mostly tied to publishing. And so I was thinking about it in the terms of, ebooks, right? And like what we buy on Amazon, typically on Amazon, and you buy an ebook and then it goes onto your e-reader device. And it sits on your e-reader device, right? And so you spend $10 on this book, you read it, and then it stays there. And there's not really anything you can do with it. And so this is where it gets a little bit, abstract, which is like, yeah, it's a digital item, but you can actually create a digital item as a non-fungible token. And then it opens up these doors for what you can do with that digital item.
And let me just quickly, because I didn't know this word until I joined this industry. So fungible and non-fungible, just for definition's sake here. So fungible means like $1. $1 is exchangeable for every other dollar, whereas non-fungible implies that there's it's unique, like one for one. It's like two houses are not the same. Those would be non-fungible assets.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm spending a lot of time on like crypto Twitter. So it's just like, yeah. So if you were to buy an ebook that is actually published as a non-fungible token, or to go further down the rabbit hole, it's actually a semi-fungible token if it's not like a one-of-one item. If you're doing, a run of like 500 books, which is more applicable to publishing than it is like, a piece of art that people want to collect as a one-of-one item. If you do it, let's say you publish 500 of these things, people can buy these NFTs using a cryptocurrency, whatever blockchain you decide to. They call it minting when you create an NFT, whatever blockchain you decide to mint this NFT on. Consumers can buy these NFTs, and let's say it's an ebook and they buy it for $10, so the equivalent of $10. And they can do a couple things with that. They can read it, they can keep it in their digital collection, or they can sell it. And so we have this sort of like used bookstore application, right? And in the NFT world, an NFT is in itself a store of value. So if I buy an NFT for 0.01 ETH, which is like about $15 today, then I can read it and I can resell it probably for close to that price. And every time I resell it, the person who created that NFT gets a kickback from the transaction fee. So now instead of like a publisher putting out, 10,000 copies of the book and hoping they all sell, you can put out a limited number of copies, see how it sells. And then those copies can continue to be resold on what they call the secondary market. And the people who created it can continue to receive royalties, theoretically in perpetuity, for as long as that blockchain exists. So a buzzword here would be like creator-focused economy, right? And so I really think that there's some power behind that. And we're seeing this shift towards creators who are putting their digital art and their digital media onto blockchain, and then it's being traded in this in the secondary economy. And as a creator, if you're a writer, you can actually grow like a really cool following from that. And you can actually like find who your followers are, because all of these transactions are being recorded on the blockchain. So you can see who's, it might be an anonymous profile, but you can be like, oh, this person or this wallet ID is like buying all of my work. And so I think that there's just this like, A16Z has put out like a lot about this theory called it's the 100 or 1,000 follower theory. And the basis of it is that in a world with 7 billion people, as a creator, you don't have to have, 20 million fans to make a living. You just have to have 100 fans who love you so much that they'll give you $1,000 a year for your content, or, 1,000 fans that'll give you $100 a year for your content. And so it's really kind of like distilling that into, okay, we're decentralizing, the distribution of art and writing, and almost taking it back from like the big publishers and distributors who take a lot of the percentage that would otherwise go to the creators as it goes through these distribution channels, and flattening it, and therefore providing a platform for which creators can actually earn, and hopefully, it's very difficult to make a living as a creator in the United States, especially. And so I think we're going to see a shift, I hope, towards this sort of creator-focused economy.
I think that was a phenomenal summary of the value proposition for NFTs, especially for creators. And I think, in the sense this, phenomenon of NFTs has gone kind of more mainstream, I think you really have seen a I don't have the data on this, but I would imagine the value that accrues to the creator of a work has gone up enormously, which is a great thing. And some people might be wondering, everything you just said, again, to take a devil's advocate, is like, okay, well, if I'm a writer and I want to monetize my work more effectively, I guess I can use Substack, right? And I'm going to go through this example just to demonstrate to you guys why there's a value proposition in one of the core tenets of a blockchain and cryptocurrency, which is this fundamental idea of decentralization. So Substack, for those of you who don't know, is a platform where you can basically easily start effectively an email newsletter, right? And it kind of gives you some design templates, and you can write and you can send every week, and then you can charge your subscribers to, like money to subscribe to this, right? And it's a similar value proposition to, potentially doing this as an NFT or publishing and a work and creating it as an NFT, but it abstracts away all the blockchain parts. You're like, okay, well, that's kind of simpler, and this seems like a good deal, right? I'm going to be able to get the same money I would for publishing on Substack. But the thing about Substack is a private company. So one of two things could happen. One, if Substack disappeared tomorrow, that value stream that goes to Joe or any other creator disappears, because they run all of the rails that make that work. So they go away, that's gone. So it's not necessarily sustainable. And then two, Substack, again, as a private company, at some point could become a public company, could have investors that say, hey, revenue numbers aren't looking very good this year. We need to increase the rents effectively on creators and change the rules kind of after the fact effectively for people who had signed up to the platform. And as a creator, now you have to face a choice. You're like, well, I have a following on this particular platform that will be very hard to take with me anywhere else. But now I just have to swallow this bitter pill of greater and greater rents. And by the way, this is not like a fable. This is actually what happened on Facebook to companies like Zynga. So Zynga was a games company that was publishing on Facebook, and Facebook, in fact, saw how successful it was and basically changed the rules after the fact to make it very difficult for Zynga to be profitable. And then at which point they were no longer profitable, and Facebook bought them at pennies on the dollar, right? So this happens very commonly. And the beautiful thing about a system that's decentralized is that if you're publishing a work as an NFT, the underlying protocol is never going to go away. It's like a fundamental property of it is that it will never go away. I mean, and that, maybe has drawbacks. If you publish something you're embarrassed about, that's a challenge, but it also, the value proposition is that for a creator, there is no single company or entity or person that can make a decision after the fact to change what this balance of payments looks like to you or to anyone else. So you encode that, and that is, and critically, the other thing is, even if you're using a front end service to kind of make it easier for consumers to interact with it, at the low level, like Joe said, you can see the people on the blockchain, on this kind of standard data layer that own your NFTs. So if you decide you're working with a service that you don't like, you can go to another one without any penalty. It's like if Substack started charging 90% fees, you could just move to Substack, new Substack Co. And you could take all your followers with you, and it would cost nothing. And that, my partner or my former partner at A16Z, Chris Dixon, has written a ton about this idea for social media, a Web3 native social media company where if you wanted to just move off of Twitter because it's, you just don't like the vibe, you have to start all over. But in Web3, this fundamental underlying data layer, which is really this universal database that everyone has access to, goes with you. And you always can take that. And that is really the thing that makes it empowering for creators and users, and it lets the value accrue at a much lower level. So thanks, Joe. So at this point, I think we've all laid out some exciting use cases of stuff that we're interested in. I think there's probably more to say there, but I did promise to give you all a chance to participate in this conversation. So maybe this is a good point to just quickly stop and just see if anyone has any questions. We'll probably maybe take 10, 15 minutes to take a couple questions here, or if people want to add something, we can do that. So Danny I don't know if we have mics we're going to pass around. So I guess raise your hand if you have a question and someone will bring you a mic.
Hi, I'm Vivin. I'm a 2018 scholar. I'm a cybersecurity researcher. So I'm just going to ask some questions from that perspective. So There's two of the concerns that I've seen um, with blockchain and cryptocurrencies. The one is just from an economic perspective, just from the recent crash that we've seen. I think it's very subject to being manipulated, and then you also have a lot of like pump and dump schemes with a lot of these coins coming up. So how do you see from anything from a regulatory perspective or anything that's necessary to have, because a coin is only as valuable as how much trust people put into it, right? So from that perspective, do you see any sort of regulatory stuff that can help? And then my second question is more related to, because you have like 50+1 attacks on blockchains where you can essentially change the consensus and modify the ledger. So when you are talking about for NFTs or like when you basically have smaller blockchain ledgers, that is much easier to do that sort of attack. On like Bitcoin or Ethereum, because of the size of the blockchain, it's a lot more computational resources to do that. So what do you see that as a potential concern? And if so, like how can you guard against that for these smaller blockchains that can be susceptible to bad actors, like even state actors, or as we see like a lot of in Russia, especially a lot of organized crime that effectively do a lot of cybercrime like that, like ransomware. And I feel like this could be a new attack surface for that as well.
I'll take the second part of that question in a minute, but I guess, Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of the regulation side, because I know you worked in the finance industry, which is obviously highly regulated. So if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. I think like the recent crash that we were talking this year before we came on stage. The sort of funny thing about it is that it was all the centralized platforms and centralized players that sort of messed it up. If you look at DeFi today, like Compound, Aave, those protocols during this whole market turmoil performed like, perfectly. There was no issues there. But the platforms like Celsius, BlockFi, Voyager, these are all centralized platforms that essentially got drunk on everyone's money and kind of ruined the party, I think, is kind of how you put it. And then that's the issue that you have in this environment, is that I guess we've taken the approach of we should try and self-regulate. That hasn't exactly worked out. I think the SEC has been incredibly soft on a lot of these platforms and players. They were in BlockFi's office, they were in Voyager's office. They didn't do anything about those platforms and how they were operating. And they were running like mini hedge funds and they blew up. And so I think what that is going to do is sort of knock that first domino to make these groups actually go and take action and lay out clear frameworks and foundations for what that regulatory landscape is going to look like. I can tell you the company that I work at today, it's called Zero Hash. We sort of take the approach of, okay, what's the best practice we can do? How do we get regulated to offer services and protect our clients and our clients' clients? And operate in that sort of, not the gray area, but what's the right way to do things? And a lot of platforms that you see out there that have survived this recent market turmoil work in exactly the same way. So, we've had a few bad players sort of, I would say, spoil things a little bit, but it's sort of attrition that needs to happen to wash things out, to get, big regulators to actually act and put in a foundation and framework for what that's going to look like.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, there is no doubt that there is a lot of bad activity in the space. And I think, unfortunately, it's largely because it's a gray area in regulations. And I think, I may have a different opinion than the others on the stage, or, people who are currently at the SEC or CFTC about how that regulation needs to be applied. But I think I don't think anybody disagrees that we need laws and we need regulations to regulate the space. Maybe there's a handful of people that might disagree with that, but I think for the most part, I think it's, like we live in a world, I certainly appreciate living in a country with laws that are enforced. And this is about consumer protection. And I think we're going to get there. It's just a new technology. Most governments are still kind of wrapping their heads around it. But I think, really, I think we're going to see increasing efforts towards consumer protection. I guess quickly, let me address the second part of your question before we turn. I know there's probably a couple other questions. So this whole principle of decentralization. So you referenced there's there's many blockchains out there. Some may be more decentralized, some may be more centralized. And I think we're in an early. So the first thing I'll say is it's an early stage. Things haven't shaken out yet to see which at a low level technological approach is the best one, and maybe there's some trade-offs there between where's my data being stored? Is there a difference between the people storing the data, running the data? And there's a whole galaxy of these things out there. So I would say the first, obvious caveat, which is also something I probably should say in the beginning, is if you're doing any of this stuff and you want to get in like participate in it or own an asset or you want to use it, do your own research, because a lot of these things, it's just brand new and there's not me or no one else on the stage or anywhere can tell you as an expert what the best practices are, because this is a brand new space, which by the way, for people who are looking at this as an industry to get into, that's one of the things I love the most about it is the book is being written as we speak. Like there are no experts, right? There's no background that you need. I mean, you can tell just the diversity of our backgrounds on the stage. You can tell, I mean, there's like, you can just, if you have a strong interest and are passionate to learn about it, you can get into it. But anyway, I think it's a matter of doing your own research and understanding the trade-offs between the different platforms. And as a consumer, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Something is being traded for somewhere else. You mentioned an interesting point about like criminal activity. I want to come back to that. And hopefully we can come back to that in a later question, because I think there's some important things to say there, but let's take another question.
Hi, I'm Natasha. So Mark, you had said that you walked in and you saw your roommate's charts and he was trading Ethereum. My husband does day trading. He's trading options right now. Is it like similar, the same thing? How are you trading Ethereum? I don't know anything about crypto, so my question is much less in depth and intelligent than his question. But is it similar, the same thing? Can you explain it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think not to get caught up too much in the trading aspect of crypto, but that is one part of it, and it is the entry point for a lot of people into this space, because they see it as a new asset class, a new technology that they want to get exposure to. And back then for me, I was working in commodities. 2016 was a part of the cycle where there was no volatility, so prices from day to day did not change that much. And the clients that I had and the business that we did, like we needed volatility. And so crypto back then was super volatile. And there was an allure to that there for me at that point, because I wanted that exposure. And at that point, we were just trading on any exchange. So you didn't have a lot of US exchanges. You had a handful. Coinbase was a big one back then. You had like 2 or 3 assets on it, I think, at the point. And we wanted to trade, 100 assets, 200 assets. So we'd open accounts on any backwater exchange that would take us and do minimal KYC and just trade these assets because they were volatile, and no different to your husband who trades options. Like they're incredibly volatile too. So he obviously likes that part of it. So that was the sort of play, but I don't think people should think about, a lot of people shouldn't think about getting into crypto just because it's volatile. They should think about, how can I take like a long-term view in this market and get some exposure that isn't going to affect me in any material way if I lose my money on that. I think that's kind of a key thing you should think about when you invest in this asset class, is that you want to invest enough that you're not going to miss it if you lose it, put it that way. And if it turns out to be something, then that's a nice upside. But ultimately, you're getting exposure to, a new technology that perhaps is going to play a big part in your life further down the line.
Yeah. And I'll just to add a dovetail into that last thing, so I used to work in venture capital, and venture capital historically has had very good returns over the last 20 years. And like none of you in this room or any individual person can get access to those directly, right? This is limited to accredited investors. And by accredited investors, it just means you have $1 million basically, right? So you're already wealthy relatively. And the greatest opportunities in the last 20 years for people to have made money have been excluded from the vast majority of people. Now, the reason for that, if you ask like the SEC, for example, is to protect consumers from fraud. And I think there's that makes a lot of sense. But I do also think it has to be acknowledged that it in some ways can be a bit unfair. And it has contributed, I think, to the concentration of wealth in this country and in other countries. And again, not investing advice, and you guys should all do your own research. But I think one of the interesting things about crypto as an asset class is that it kind of is potentially like it opens the door to those kind of opportunities that the average person before didn't necessarily have. And of course, we were just talking a minute ago about NFTs. People who are just creators. I actually read a story the other day about an Army veteran who'd done jail time, and then got out of jail and then was doing NFTs, and he was kind of doing it based on like shoes. And the guy, went from having nothing to, doing well, like very well for himself. And it was like, these are opportunities that just for value, we're in a new moment of value creation. And I think that's a cool thing about it. So I don't want to like emphasize the fact that like people can make money on this space. That's not at all what this panel is about. But I do think it's cool that the value that's being created is more democratized than in a lot of other asset classes historically.
Yeah, it is unusual that this is like the first asset class that is like retail driven. Like retail built this, institutions came later. Whereas like every other asset class you look at globally, it's always institutions first and then retail come after. So there is that play to it for sure. But yeah, definitely, take a long-term view, but don't be careful what you invest in the space, I always say.
Okay, let's take one more question and then maybe we'll jump in and do a little chat and then we can take more at the end. Go ahead.
Hey folks, Travis, 2014 Scholar. So let me tee this one up. Do you believe there's a trajectory where the technical capabilities of the underlying currency actually drive the value, or is it always going to be the kind of central mass or the coordinated mass or the popularity of the currency that drives the value? The reason I asked this question, so I bought my first Bitcoin in 2011 to make a donation to like a nerdy technical publication. I never thought it really had any value because I understood the technical limitations. I had a barista in 2016 that asked me like, hey, should I invest in Bitcoin? I was like, no, transaction limits and proof of stake, proof of work, like there's issues here. Fortunately, he ignored me and he bought his beach house in Hawaii. And so like, I always wonder, is it going to be the popularity of the coin that drives the value, or is there going to be a transition or an inflection point where the use case and the technical capabilities really matter because we're actually using it as a currency, kind of what it's meant to do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. That's interesting. I think that I believe it's going to be the technological capabilities. And the reason why is because we're seeing the popularity of the currencies. I think people are becoming more and more skeptical of sort of the hype around the next big currency, right? And rightfully so, because a lot of people have lost a lot of money, trying to make it rich that way. And so we're seeing blockchains start to build out specifically for different use cases. And so when we're talking about decentralization and security and stability and scalability. Sometimes one of those things have to take a back seat in order to build a blockchain. And so I think that we're going to see blockchains that are a little bit more willing to sacrifice decentralization as a way of bringing people onto blockchain. I really think in the future, blockchain is going to be the underlying technology for so many things, and we're not even going to know. It's just going to be baked into society. And so there's going to be blockchains that are backed by a cryptocurrency that we might not even know the name of, right? We're conducting transactions in fiat and everything is being written on the blockchain and that money is being converted behind the scenes. And so I think that I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I do think it's going to be the underlying technology. What does that actual blockchain do? And then there's going to be currencies like Bitcoin, I think, that are just going to, the value is in the currency itself as, probably the best performing cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, honestly. I think fundamentally the value it will be derived from some objective capability that the technology provides. But I think it's easy to fall into the trap of just looking at something and trying to evaluate on what's the best technology, because you realize that the metrics become kind of subjective. And what I would say, I guess the other piece of value is value is an inherently subjective idea, right? So let me just give an example, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which one is objectively better? Right. Well, okay. So, but we could dig into why that is, right? And fundamentally, we're going to get down to the idea of Coca-Cola, how it tastes, how it feels, like what the brand is associated with. I mean, this is really the idea of brands, right? It's like brand power in general, like, is subjective, right? And it's what you value. I mean, the Tillman Foundation, we're all scholars, right? The Tillman Foundation and Pat Tillman, like the legacy of his life is an idea that we, I think, especially in this room, are attracted to. And that's like, it's not, you can't like technologically quantify that. You know what I mean? And this is, I think, because these are such, the decentralization aspects of it means that they do kind of make it meme driven, right? These memes, these ideas that people find attractive. That's why, like, a lot of people, Bitcoin, for example, again, I said I wouldn't get technical, but like, one thing about Bitcoin is there's 20 million tokens ever created, right? And people latch onto that. They know nothing else, but they're like, wow, this is like, it's like gold, but it's the best gold, right? And forget every other technological aspect. I mean, it's got many other drawbacks, but people just latch onto that. And that drives, like, that itself can create momentum. And that's, I think it's a very interesting, so that has to be accounted for when you look at whether or not one of these things is going to become the new global standard. Because there's been many examples throughout history. I mean, the one that everyone always points to is like VHS and Betamax. We're like, okay, what is Betamax? No one knows. Like, it's some standard that was, like, by some objective measurements better than VHS, but like VHS just ended up getting a lead and then went out, and like no one even remembers Betamax. So there's lots of examples, like BlackBerry and iPhone, for example, is another one.
If I was to add to that there, I would just say, like, at this early stage, like, people look at Ethereum, they say that thing is like 40% done. That's what Vitalik would say. So it is super early in terms of where all this technology is. But at the end of the day, this stuff should be really boring, I think. We shouldn't be too excited by Bitcoin or Ethereum. These are like utility assets. Like, when's the last time you got excited by like utilities company? It's got to become boring to work. And eventually you'll see the price action, I think, stabilize, like, and sort of work in that kind of fashion, as opposed to this whipsaw effects we see right now, where there's massive exuberance in the market and then massive fear, and it moves back and forth. And eventually, as Joe said, we're going to use applications and we're not even going to know what's running underneath it, because we won't care, and price will reflect that as well, I think.
Yeah, let me, okay, so these are great questions. We're going to take a couple more questions at the end, and maybe just like, I'm going to switch for this last little discussion part. I'm going to switch the tone just a little bit. We've talked a lot about the use cases and why this is interesting. But I want to kind of get a sense, or I want everyone on the panel here to share, like, what about working in this industry they like, or even don't like, I guess, like that, the experience, shifting from like the use cases of this technology to the experience of being a part of this, what I would argue is more than just a new industry. It's a new phenomenon. So I don't know, Joe, maybe do you want to share like what's the best or worst, or just best, doesn't matter, part for you of being, in this kind of industry or working in this.
Sure. Yeah. I think the best so far for me has honestly been like this sort of sense of community in pioneering new technology and new use cases for new technology. It really feels like this sort of sense of adventure. And, there's people in the industry that are in it to try to get rich. But for the most part, the people that I've met are all willing to try to help one another learn. There's some great veterans organizations on Discord, where people are like making connections, meaningful connections, talking to each other about, oh, you're interested in NFT, you're interested in DeFi, like, here, let's set up a channel for that. Let's talk about it. I've been doing that, so you're starting to meet people within these communities, and then the subsets within those communities. And I think also, as someone who identifies as, trans and queer and a member of the LGBTQ community, I just feel like I have this like opportunity to be a part of creating Web3 and deconstructing some of the issues with Web2, and being, having like communities that maybe were underrepresented in Web2 in the way that it was constructed. Like, we're just the beginning. And so there's an opportunity here for communities that were underrepresented to get in and be a part of building the future of what I really think is going to be the driver of the global economy. And so like women's organizations, underrepresented, minorities, all of these like groups are coming together and going like, hey, it's our turn to stand up and have a say in how we're building this thing. And I think that's really cool. It certainly was not my experience with Web 2. Maybe I was too young, but everything became centralized very quickly, and falling under the big five, I think, right? Like Google and Amazon. And so I just think the opportunity is endless right now. And it's so exciting to be a part of the beginning.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar to that in that, what I've loved about being in this space is the fact that it is so global done. There's no real centralized hub where all this action happens. It's not like, San Francisco is where all the Web2 companies are. It's you could go anywhere. We were just talking about conferences that we've all been going to, and it's it's fantastic that you can go to pretty much any country in the world, get involved in a local community there that's got like an ETH community or Bitcoin community or whatever it is, and have these different developer networks that you can interact with. And that's pretty incredible. I come from like stodgy finance, where either in my business was you're in Chicago or London and maybe Hong Kong, and that was it. And this is totally dispersed and totally global, and you get a great opportunity to travel if you're working for these different companies. That's also the worst part about it as well, is because you have to travel to all these different places and it's not centralized in any location. But I'm sort of going back on my answer there.
Yeah. Well, I just flew here from Paris, which is a lovely city, but yeah, that's there's a lot of road time, but it is also cool because he does, to Joe's point, like there's a huge amount of diversity. Last question for the panel here, and then we'll open it up and take a few more questions. But you've talked a lot about what crypto is, what it represents, what kind of the industry is. What's the next frontier, and what's something that is maybe just on the horizon for the space that looking forward you're really excited about? And maybe I can even start with this. The company that I work at is kind of like at this, we're focused on this. Is one thing that I think about with this space. I mean, we've talked a lot about its amazing properties. I think one of the challenges, frankly, is that the paradigm of everything that happens is fully transparent. And that transparency, and by transparent, I mean, like I said earlier, like once data is on the blockchain, at least the blockchains that exist today, it's viewable for all time by everyone forever, right? And again, recall from my story, I got interested in this space because the people who I thought could benefit from this technology were Syrian refugees. And if you think about living in a place like Syria, where the government is maybe a little bit less or a little maybe more malevolent against some of its own citizens for the purposes of staying authoritarian, like that can be a frightening thought, right? If you imagine all of your financial records for all time are always open and accessible, like even in a regime that maybe one day is like, kind of benign, it can turn into something that's not. And so I think one of the things that is really exciting for me about the frontier of Web3 and crypto is how do we ensure our data is owned by us, and we can keep the information that's most important to us, like arguably our financial transaction history. Like, how do we keep that private, or at least limited to who we share it with, but still keep the advantage of like the interoperability of all of these things? And so the company that I work at, and there's a few other companies, mostly Web3 focused, that focus on this, this new technology called zero knowledge cryptography, which is basically this idea of you prove that something is true cryptographically without revealing why it's true. And I think that primitive, is so exciting, not just for Web3, but for Web2. If you think about the way all of these ad-based models work in Web2, I mean, it really is something that is extractive from users in terms of the data that you're giving up to access these services for free. And there's a cost associated with that. Like I guarantee you right now, probably every single person in this room, someone could go on a website and buy your profile that would be far more informative about you than you would want it to be, right? And so I think Web3, it has helped people understand like the data is an asset that they can own. And I think zero knowledge cryptography is a technique that in the future, I think is going to be applied to making sure that that data that you own is protected from the people against people who you don't want to see it. So that to me is a really exciting trend that I'm excited about. What about for you guys?
Yeah, similar for me. I think without getting too political, there are countries in this world where power is held because they control the banks, right? And so I think that's going to be extremely important. I think even in America, like voter fraud is a huge topic of conversation. And I think there's blockchain, there's definitely great blockchain use cases for voting. So I just think that we're going to see, it comes down to the data and the ability to have voting. I just think is a great example. Like everyone can go and vote on the blockchain, and like there's not going to be any sort of, obviously like at the beginning, there's probably going to be some issues, but I think like eventually it's going to be, the single source of truth. And we're going to be able to protect our democracies that way. And then, that goes into the financial systems as well. So I think that's like a really great use case for the next frontier. I think, beyond that, I probably can't give you a good answer.
Oh, that's great though. Mark?
Yeah, no, I'm with you guys on that there. I think it's incredible to think that we have a way to move towards that there, that you look back in the past scares we've had with like Equifax. I remember a friend of mine telling me, hey, you got to call those guys in time to shut your like account down so that, nobody can access your account. I did that. And then I applied for like a credit card or something like there,
Yeah.
and I had to call them back up to get it unlocked. And it was just this whole thing. I'm like, well, this is stupid. But ultimately, this is something we actually, we have the technology to go forward and do something like this where my data is protected. As you see, we've got zero knowledge proofs. It's ubiquitous in every different facet of my financial life. Like we're moving towards that. And I get excited too, though, about the way that we could even further utilize the different assets that we have today that we may not even think we can utilize. So there's an airline here in the US that's really far late stage in terms of what they want to do in the NFT space. And it's incredible how you have this creator economy that is now driving forward and showing these like old companies that there's ways that they can give their users value for their assets. And what they want to do is let you sell or make an NFT of your status on the airline. So if you fly Delta or you fly American, I fly United, and you're on a Delta flight, I could sell you my status and you could use that for that flight and then sell it and then give it back to me. And so the airline would make money from that transaction. You get to have the status and I get to make some utility out of having that asset as well. And these are all like near-term things that the next year or two you're going to see happen, and you're going to wake up someday and be like, oh, that's just the way things work now. And that's a fantastic way I think that this whole space is moving towards. So I'm really excited to see it there come through and have those real world use cases.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a couple minutes left. I think we have time for probably one more question. There's a gentleman in the very back with a very high hand raised. So just poke it out and pass the crowd. So maybe we'll take that. We'll see one, maybe two more questions, but we'll see. How much time?
Hey, how's everybody doing? Roberto Diaz here, 2020 Tillman Scholar. I was in the back and I was talking to Alonzo. I think we can all agree that technology is moving at a fast pace. Just hearing about the conversation we're having, I'm curious to know, thinking about this, how cryptocurrency may impact rural communities or like third world countries, and if there's a widening gap that will occur. And how do we provide access to those people in those areas? So
I actually think, and I saw this firsthand working at A16Z because I actually think this is a technology that's going to massively benefit third world countries in the short term, especially countries that rely on remittances for a large part of their GDP, right? I mean, you look at, and this is already here today, the average, remittance, company that'll facilitate remittances across border takes an enormous amount of money to do that transfer, or an enormous fraction of the value being sent, right? And takes days. And, to Mark's earlier point, you can do this far more cheaply, and therefore you can ensure more value gets to, as a remittance back to these countries, and therefore make those economies that rely on this money from remittances stronger. I also think that it's interesting. One of the most fascinating developments of this past year, you saw El Salvador, as its central bank, began acquiring Bitcoin as an asset that they're holding as a central bank related asset. And I think, third world countries and really the entire global financial system relies extremely heavily on the dollar. And as an American, there's many reasons why that's a very good thing. It certainly gives Americans a lot of power, and right. But as a citizen of like El Salvador, it's not always a good thing, right? That the value of your export economy, or the value of, basically the goods that you could acquire, like that you need to run an economy, like energy and food, like that fluctuates wildly depending on the value of the dollar and depending on a lot of factors you don't control. And I think it's interesting. I think to me, this is like one of the interesting macroeconomic frontiers, is thinking about, as countries start to think about what's next beyond just the dollar denominated financial system, like how do these crypto assets fit into that? So I think El Salvador is going to be a really interesting test case. And I think if you see that experiment work for them, I bet you will see hundreds of third world countries follow suit, because it gives them potentially an enormous advantage. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think adoption rates in some of those countries is even higher than, say, in the US, because, as you said earlier, we have a luxury being based here in that a lot of our financial system, it's pretty well defined and it's pretty safe, and we have like FDIC insurance, and it's a good place to be and have those products. But then if you're in South America or wherever else, and the trust in the banks isn't exactly there, you now have this alternative asset that you can use and put your trust in that instead. So it's surprising to see how a lot of those countries are actually moving faster than maybe even we are. So that's where that gap, I think, is going to get closed.
Yeah, I think to add to that, there's a popular crypto wallet called MetaMask. And to put this in perspective, there's, I think, 11 million MetaMask users worldwide, right? And so it's not very many. And there's 300 million people, I think, worldwide who have interacted with crypto. But in the United States, if you have your money in a bank, right, and you go and you sign up for a bank account, you go through the know your customer process, and there's already this like establishment of trust there. But in other countries, if you're in a rural area, the process of like setting up a crypto wallet and being able to do that from your phone and go through the KYC process and then have your assets held in a trusted source, that's huge, right? You don't even have to go to the bank. And so I think, we're seeing mass adoption of this outside of the US, where there's maybe less infrastructure that supports a relationship of trust between who's holding the money and the individual.
Yeah. And I guess and maybe this is a note to end on, I guess the last piece is, I agree with what both of these folks said with regard to, the use case from the individual. And I think it really, and I go around the world to talk about this stuff. And people it's the hardest sell for people in the US and Europe. But if you go to a place, like Colombia, where there's lots of Venezuelan refugees, they get it immediately, because it's like people in Venezuela, like one day woke up and their money was worth like 1/10,000th of what it was worth. And the use case for something like this to store value is obvious. And that's, I guess, maybe the note to end on here is that if we look at the way that the world has been architected in terms of finance, in terms of Web 2, there really are strong kind of currents pushing everything towards more and more centralized for efficiency's sake. But it also makes it more, I would argue, brittle as a system. And also it affords individuals far less say in what that looks like. And I think, to me, at a very philosophical level, blockchain and Web3, like a fundamental principle, is about liberty. The idea that you have effectively rights, or you have a say. There's a certain amount of power that you have that can never be relinquished, right? And this was for many of us in this room, we volunteered to defend the Constitution, and obviously liberty is one of these key values. And for others who hadn't, I know you're associated with someone who has, right? So this is something we've all fought for and believe deeply in. And I think this technology really encodes that value in a way that I think can make the world a much, much better place. And it stands in contrast to the way things have kind of been built up to this point. So with that, little bit of a philosophical aside. Thank you for your question. Thank you everyone for participating in this panel. We really enjoyed being here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Joe, for being here. And thank you to the Tillman Foundation for letting us talk to you today.
Thank you.